Okay, so what would young Amy Trask say to Amy Trask here as we sit at Gladstone's staring off the coast of the Pacific Palisades about how things have worked out for you?
Unexpected. I never had a plan, and I couldn't be happier.
And it's funny because I think so many people now get so regimented, like I have to do this by a certain age, I have to do this by a certain age, this is the next step, I gotta do this. I feel like so many of the most successful people I know never had a plan. They were just like, let's figure it out.
You know what, at one point during my career, someone I adore, I trust, said, you have to have a plan. You have to, I think the exact words were, you have to have, or you need a 5-year plan. And I looked at him and I said, I don't want a plan. I don't want a 5-year plan. I don't want any kind of a plan. I don't need a plan. And then I noted that that whole 5-year plan thing didn't work out so well for the Russians.
It is true though, like, there are people that need to be that way, and I get it, and it helps them and it makes them successful. But like, when someone says, where do you want to be in 3 years? My answer is like, alive?
Yeah,
like that's the best I can give you.
And look, the best advice I've ever received in my life was from my mom, who told me from the time I was a little girl, to thine own self be true. And like moms can do, she said it over and over and over again, and like little girls can do, I rolled my eyes when she did. But Trey, it was the best advice I've ever received. And the reason I note that is, if what works for someone is to have a plan, then have a plan.
Right.
I don't want a plan. I've never had a plan. I'm not going to plan. I recognize some people have a life which requires planning, necessitates planning. Some people want a plan. Go ahead, have a plan. I don't want a plan.
Yeah. Your mom was very inspirational. My mom was very judgmental. Her saying was, remember, be sure your sins will find you out. Thanks, Mom. Appreciate that. And she was right. That's a separate issue. Moms are always right, but yours was a little more inspirational than the message I got from my mom, or she just knew how much trouble I was going to get in.
Well, and by the way, the best part of my mom telling me over and over again, to thine own self be true, was it wasn't until I was well into college that I learned that was Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I thought my mom invented that, so you know what? Shakespeare, my mom, it's the best advice I've ever received.
Same thing, really. You always have said that you were a very difficult child. And you have to look back on that with a little pride now, right? Because it's a label that I think a lot of kids get stuck with, and some kids feel like, oh, I guess I'm not what everybody wants me to be, but that didn't bother you at all.
Well, I'm glad you used the word label, because, and when I talk about this, it's not hyperbole. I'm not making it up for a soundbite. It's really true. In kindergarten, I was labeled a behavior problem. And if you are listening to this, kindergarten teachers, or really teachers of any children of any age, don't label kids.
Yeah.
It's just not the right thing to do. But I was labeled a behavior problem. And we went back recently, we found them at my parents' house, report cards for me from kindergarten on. Behavior problem, doesn't follow directions, doesn't take instruction, doesn't listen, talks back. I mean, that really was the child I was. So hats off to my parents for their patience. And maybe that's part of the reason Al and I were able to work together for almost 30 years.
Well, yeah, I was about to say, it sounds like you just described every CEO or, innovator or creator or someone that found something different that's ever lived on the planet, right?
My mom told a great story about, I'd been going to kindergarten for a few days and, maybe a week or so, and she picked me up and she said, what'd you do today in kindergarten? And I said, nothing. And she said, well, I know you did something, so let's talk about what you did. Nothing. She says, Amy, maybe you're hungry, maybe you're tired, you can tell me you'd like to discuss it later, but don't tell me you did nothing. What did you do today? Nothing. She said, okay, let's start this way. What happened when you got into the classroom? We started class. Then what happened? I got sent to stand in the corner. Then what happened? I stood there all day till school was over. My sister, who's in the car, says, how often does this happen? Every day. And my mom just busted a U-turn and drove back to kindergarten. So, look, don't label kids. By the way, my 6th grade teacher, I've shared this story before, my 6th grade teacher, within earshot of me, I don't know that he knew I could hear, but I did, told my mom, this one's never gonna get into college. Your older kids are smart, this one not gonna make it to college. Don't label kids.
I don't understand the upshot of telling someone that who's in the 6th grade, or someone whose kid is in the 6th grade, as if you have some sort of all-knowing seeing power about how things are going to work out.
And the best part, I was out in the hallway. I'd been told to stand in the hallway, but those top windows, they call them transoms, were open, and I could hear every word, and I will remember for my whole life what my mom said back to him. She just ripped him to pieces and said, how dare you decide in 6th grade what a child is capable of doing? And she just went on a little tear.
Yeah, and what was the 6th grade teacher's name?
Should I say it?
Sure.
Mr. Santel.
Mr. Santel, you don't know Jack. I'll tell you that right now.
I've never shared his name with anyone, but now you know.
Well, we'll make a fake first name. Reuben Santel.
No, it's okay. I just could think of no one with whom I'd rather share it than you. Mr. Santel.
Damn you, Mr. Santel. Hope you've learned your lesson. So
he's probably about 90 now.
Yes, but you can always evolve. We can always evolve. Speaking of evolving, you did not come from a football family.
Nope.
Like, where did your love of football come from?
When I started junior high, I went to a junior high school football game because it's what you did.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the game. You know, it's an exciting game, but it's a very cerebral game.
Yeah.
It's a game of matchups.
Yeah.
And what appealed to me is the matchups. You know, can your corners cover their receivers?
Right.
How does your pass protection match up against their pass rush? It's a game of it's an intellectual, cerebral game of matchups. And you know what? It's like a game of chess with very fast, very strong, very powerful chess pieces. I fell in love with the game. And I was the weird one in the family. Well, I was the weird one in the family for a lot of reasons, but I'm the one that wanted to stay home and watch football when everyone else was going out and doing something, which prompted them to, again, note what they often did, which was, I think we got the wrong one in the hospital.
Did you ever, at that early age, whether it was junior high or high school, think, maybe I'll try and make a career out of football?
Never, ever, 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 ever. I had no idea what my career would be, or stated differently, I thought I would have umpteen different careers growing up, and I never had an idea as to what I would do, more than a fleeting idea from time to time.
So you went to Cal.
Go Bears.
Berkeley. And by the way, I feel like half the people in the media either went to Cal or went to Northwestern. And also Syracuse.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 schools. So if you've made it in the business not being in one of those 3 schools, congratulations. Did you go straight to law school after Cal?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I recognize the tremendous, tremendous great fortune I had that I had parents who said, we'll educate you. And I say that, Trey, with all the appreciation in the world and all the recognition that not everyone has that luxury. And by the way, when I went to Cal, when I went to college, my parents said, look, any UC you want. Well, actually, my dad said UCLA and you're living at home. But after we had that argument and I said, oh, no, I'll pick a UC, but I'm not living at home. Boy, oh boy, tuition. I mean, I think my first semester tuition was like $81 a quarter. Yeah. And by the time I graduated, we were up in arms because tuition was, I think, $157 or $212 a quarter. And I note that because notwithstanding, it should not be the cost it is.
I agree.
For kids today to go to a public school. You want to go to a fancy schmancy private school, that's your decision, but we need to make public education available to everyone. And I share that because it was available, and I do recognize the good fortune I had that I had parents who said, go ahead, go to college, go to grad school, because I am very cognizant that not everyone has that good fortune.
No, I agree.
But I knew coming out of college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd be a mystery writer like Jessica Fletcher, or I thought maybe, you're laughing.
Murder, She Wrote?
Yeah, you're laughing. I thought maybe I'd be a spy novelist.
Listen, I want to be clear. I'm not laughing because I don't think you could do it. I'm not putting that on you at all. I
love that you laughed. Yeah. I love that you laughed.
No, it's just like I never would have thought of you as like a mystery writer.
Well, I thought maybe I'd be a mystery writer. I thought I'd be a spy novelist. I thought about being a journalist.
Don't do that.
I thought about being a college professor, but then I realized I'd have to kind of go wherever the college openings were, and I didn't want to go somewhere like cold up in the northeast.
By the way, as we're shooting this, it's about 58 degrees in California, and everyone is freaking out
Oh, I
how
know.
cold it
Oh,
is.
seriously.
Like, I'm about to walk in there in a mankini. Like, this is warm for me from the East Coast.
Get that down, Trey in a mankini. I live for that moment.
Never. Cut.
No, look, I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in this area, and when it rains 3 drops, we run around screaming, "Storm of the century, storm of the century." And I do define fall as under 75 and winter as under 70. So welcome to winter here.
It's a lot better than winters I've had in the past.
So I
can promise
decided
you
I
that.
couldn't be a college professor because I didn't want to go somewhere small and cold. So I wanted to do everything, and I decided to go to law school. Not because I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't. I swore I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I knew I was never going to go into a courtroom, but I wanted the education and the background it would give me for business.
Right. So how did you transition out of school to your first law job to somehow getting involved with the Raiders? There was a phone call involved.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I'm in law school and I hear all these other students talking about externships. I'd never heard the word externship, but I heard the word internship. I didn't know the difference. And they're all talking about these externships they're going to do. So I thought, oh, externship, internship, maybe I'll do one of those. And the year that I graduated from Cal and moved down back home to Los Angeles for grad school was the same year that Al ultimately moved the team to Los Angeles. He had tried a few years earlier, been ordered back by court order, finally came down, and I thought, well, here's my favorite football team, moving when I'm moving where I'm moving, and I picked up the phone and called the Raiders and said I'd like to do an internship. And the gentleman who answered the phone, well, the receptionist put me through to someone who said, "What's that?" And I told him what an internship was, and he said, "Okay, come on down." And that was Al Locasal.
Oh, that was Al.
Just gruff. Okay. So I did an internship while I was in law school. It was supposed to be 1 year. It ended up being a couple of years. Graduated law school. There was nothing available with the team at the time, so I joined a law firm, having sworn I would never, ever, ever practice law. I did join a law firm, although not in a courtroom sense. And by the way, Trey, I swore I'm never stepping foot in a courtroom. And then I went to work for Al.
Yeah, I was about to say, the courtroom wasn't coming from the law, it was coming from working for Al Davis.
And it was not coming from being a lawyer in that sense, but being a witness.
Correct.
So I did an internship for the team a couple years, joined a law firm. About a year into my career, got a phone call from the Raiders saying, "We have an opening for a young lawyer. Are you interested?" And Trey, I ran so fast to the managing partner's office to give him notice that I was leaving, that had Al seen me run, he'd assigned me to play corner. And I didn't ask what the compensation was. I didn't ask anything about anything, none of the questions that one might normally ask. It was a dream come true, and I said yes. I ran faster than a 4.340 to give notice at the firm, and I joined the Raiders.
Okay, so that's interesting because it was, a year after you'd done the internship? Or,
Yeah, about a year.
so you really hadn't had much communication with them?
Oh, I stayed in touch.
Yeah.
Friendly communication. Right.
But the point I'm making is you must have done something during that internship that really caught their attention to say, hey, if we have something, we should call her. Do you have any idea what that might have been?
Well, the funny story associated with that was when they decided to add a lawyer to staff, the gentleman who called and extended me the offer, Jeff Beer, and he's the gentleman for whom I did the internship, went into Al's office and said, "I'd like to bring Amy in full time." And Al said, "Oh yeah, her."
So he remembered
Good.
you.
Yeah. It was a little bit more, there was a little more to it than that. That was very, very touching in terms of what he said. But I guess the only thing I can tell you, Trey, is I worked really, really, really hard. And I think hard work matters. I think hard work really matters. So I did what I was asked to do, and then I did everything I could possibly do. You know, I fulfilled all that was asked of me, all of those responsibilities, and then I stayed there and said, what more can I do? I never left the office until the gentleman for whom I was working, to whom I was reporting, left the office. I walked around saying, how can I help? It didn't matter what, and look, I'm an intern, so I'm being given jobs like, go Xerox this.
Right.
And for those of you kids who are listening to this, there were these things called Xeroxes.
Yeah, we actually had to make paper copies. We couldn't send a link or download a PDF.
Right, or email or anything.
none of that.
And I thought, well, I'm going to copy better than anyone has ever copied, and I'm going to do it faster and more neatly. And you know, I would walk into the ticket office the day, you know, if I was there the day before a game, and say, want me to alphabetize the will call envelopes? I mean, these were not big tasks,
Right.
but I found a way to contribute in any way I could.
And you also told me once that you just started walking around and like listening in on meetings and places that you weren't scheduled to be, but you did it just to sort of expand your base of operations with the team, right?
And to offer to help. You know, I did that as an intern, and also more so once I had joined full time. I'm brought in to add to the legal department. But if I could walk into the scouting department and say, hey, do you guys need any help organizing anything? If I could walk into the ticket office and say, want me to handle all the alphabetizing? I mean, look, I might not have known how to do what the ticket office was doing in terms of, you know, accounting or seat assignment, but I know how to alphabetize. And so I would walk from department to department and say, you know, can I help? How can I help? And so a few people took me aside and said, you know, Al's not going to like this. Al's not going to like hearing that you're walking around butting into other departments. Al's not going to like hearing that you're walking throughout the organization trying to insert yourself in departments. And I thought, okay, if that's the case, I bet he'll tell me. And one day I was walking up our main staircase and he was walking down the main staircase, and we ended up on the same stair at the same time. And he said to me, where are we on ticket sales? And it was at that moment I realized he had heard that I was walking around the organization asking questions and trying to learn. And that was not only his way of asking a question, that was encouraging to me to continue to do so.
A little validation, right?
Like encouraging me, oh, okay, you're going to be walking around the organization, help me out with the answers. And what I learned then was, know the answer.
Yeah, so was that the beginning of sort of your working relationship with him?
I don't think so. I mean, I interacted with him on any number of occasions. Look, and by the way, one of the first interactions I had with him as a full-time employee, so this is like within a week or two after joining the organization on a full-time basis, maybe 2 weeks in, I had a huge disagreement with him. And I share this with people because the biggest misconception about Al is that he wouldn't tolerate disagreement, or he wouldn't tolerate those who disagreed with him. Well, he walked into an office where I was sitting with a colleague, and he ripped into this guy like I can only imagine a velociraptor ripping into its prey. And I'm listening to him yell and rant, and I realized he was wrong. And so I said, excuse me, you're wrong.
Wow.
And I said it firmly and loudly. Look, A, you know me, I don't have a dainty voice.
Correct.
But I needed to be heard over his, you know, yelling or hollering. And I said, excuse me, you're wrong. And I will forever remember the look on his face when his head turned to me, kind of like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, but without the green stuff. And he looked at me, and he's looking at me like just sort of with incredulously.
How dare you?
No, like, you said what?
Yeah.
Who, what? Yeah. And I said, look, you're wrong. And I said, if the facts upon which you were basing your conclusion were accurate, then that's a fair conclusion. But you are basing your conclusion on inaccurate information, inaccurate data, and you are wrong. Well, he yelled, and I yelled, and he yelled, and I yelled, and it got very loud, and we went back and forth for quite a period of time. I learned much, much, much later that everyone within earshot in the organization had gathered outside the office because they could not believe that this girl who'd been there 2 weeks was engaging in this argument with Al. One woman actually even brought boxes over to help me pack. Well, after we'd argued a good amount of time, he said, oh, okay, I gotcha. And then we went on. And I learned that all the rumors about him not tolerating disagreement were wrong. If you're going to disagree, don't just disagree to be disagreeable. Come armed with data and facts. And I will tell you, we disagreed over 30 years, almost 30 years, more than we agreed.
So how did the relationship build from being the second lawyer to someone who stands up to Al to becoming basically his most trusted confidant in the organization?
I can't answer that for you. That would have to be something he would have had to answer. I can tell you that.
But you noticed things changing, right?
It was an evolution. Again, I never had a plan. I never had my eye on a specific role. Trey, if my role in the organization were to stand on the sideline during the game and simply pick up the scrunched up Gatorade cups, I would have been thrilled, because I would have been contributing to the team, and that's all I wanted to do, was be part of the organization and contribute to the team. And certainly my role grew and evolved, but I never had a plan. And by the way, I never needed a title. I don't care about titles.
But you did end up with a really cool title as CFO. So how did you get from the second lawyer in to there? Like, what were the steps?
Well, I'm going to correct you only because I won't claim credit for being the CFO. I was the CEO.
CEO, sorry. CFO's financial,
right.
chief executive. Yeah,
you know my math.
You know my English.
The league at one point said to the Raiders, there was a league requirement that certain positions be denominated. You know, you needed a title, and we'd never been a fan of titles. And the league said, Al, who's your CEO? And he said, it's Amy.
And that's how you found out? Just like that?
Well, no, it was even better. The league said, Al, you need to name a CEO. You need to name a CEO, and you need to tell us the name of your CEO. Yeah. So Al says to me, tell him it's you.
And that's how you got it?
He actually told them as well. Yeah. But he said, just tell him it's you. Yeah. And then I kind of laughed, and but that was after he'd already told them.
Right, so but at some point, like, did you, I know you didn't plan it and you didn't count it, but at some point you had to think, things are going really well here for me. This might be something, really? Not at all?
I'd have been happy without the title. I'd have been happy in any role. It's the truth, Trey. It's Girl Scouts honor.
I believe you. I believe you.
By the way, back to being a behavior problem, I got expelled from Girl Scouts for a while.
For what?
Behavior issues.
Oh.
My dad called up, though, and kind of read them the riot act, because it really wasn't my fault. It was the Girl Scout troop leader's daughter's fault.
See, they were going on bad data, just like that. They were on bad data. So that's why that turned around.
My dad had my back.
There you go.
I got back into Girl Scouts.
As he should. So when you became CEO, what changed for you in terms of what you were doing?
Nothing. Nothing.
Really?
Really nothing. I mean, I grew into the role I had. And look, let's talk about the Raider organization.
Yeah.
Al ran the Raider organization. Some owners step back and delegate entirely to others. Al clearly ran all of our football operations. He was also involved in our business operations as well. And we clashed as to many things in that regard. But at the end of the day, my view was, look, if you want to do something or not do something, and I disagree with you, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to tell you why I disagree with you. I'm going to try to change your mind. But at the end of the day, you are the controlling owner of this business.
Right.
So the decision is up to you. And once you make a decision, even if I disagree with you, it's my job to effectuate it to the best of my ability. And it's my job to do so without telling anyone I disagree with you. Because the thing for which I had no patience and no tolerance whatsoever were people who would run around dissociating themselves from the decision of the organization with a whisper campaign. Well, I don't like the idea. I don't like the idea. Yeah. Hey, the owner of this organization just made a decision. It's our job to effectuate it. The other thing for which I had no tolerance and no patience and no respect were people who wouldn't disagree with him to his face,
but would behind his back.
When I disagreed with Al, I told him I disagreed with Al. I tried to convince him, and when I couldn't, it was my job to effectuate a decision as best I could and not run around and distance myself from it.
Yeah. But there had to be something in your relationship that made it work, right?
Innumerable things.
Yeah.
I'm a contrarian.
Yeah.
I'm a contrarian to a fault sometimes. Sometimes sitting on television just to be a contrarian. I'll disagree with people, even though I know my disagreement is wrong, but I am a contrarian. Al was a contrarian. I was willing to disagree with him when others were not.
Gotcha.
I was willing to argue with him when others were not. Someone once reported back to him, someone from the Raiders once reported back to him a situation in which I stood up at a league meeting and was very, very disagreeable. I disagreed, and it was reported back in a manner, I'm sorry, it wasn't reported by someone with the Raiders in that instance, it was someone from another team. And they reported it in or shared it with him in a manner that they thought would, he would be bothered by it. He almost popped with pride.
You do tell that one great story about one of your first meetings as an executive with the team and an owner who you have never named.
I will never name.
And will never name him, and I respect that. Basically thought that you were there as part of the hotel staff.
Right. First meeting I ever attended.
This is the first NFL league meeting.
First one I ever attended. Yes, it was a 2 per club meeting.
Right.
So every team owner or in the case of the Packers, team head.
Right.
I always, the lawyer in me has to sort of know. I know there's not really one team owner,
Correct.
but every team, other than the Packers, sent its primary owner, and every team was elected to bring another person. So Al was heading to a meeting, and he said, I want you to come to this meeting with me. It was in a couple days, and it was my first league meeting very, very early in my career. I don't remember if it was my first year or shortly after my first year as a full-time employee, roughly my first year. As you know from league meetings, everybody rushes down to get the chairs, which is a whole nother subject in its entirety. Yeah. And you get to the meeting and there's coffee set up in the back of the room and snacks, and people mill around having either breakfast or a snack or coffee. I got down, that's what I was doing, waiting for the meeting to start, and the owner of a team approached me and said, would you get me some coffee? And I looked around and I quickly realized I was the only woman in the room other than those on catering staff.
Right.
So I thought very, very quickly and decided I was going to have fun with it. And I said, sure, how do you take it? I knew within moments the meeting would be starting and we'd all walk to our seats.
Right.
So I said, sure, how do you take it? And he told me, and I brought him the coffee, and within minutes the meeting started and we walked to our seats, and as fate would have it, my seat was right across from his. And he saw me sit down, and Trey, you could see the blood draining from his face. Well, I saw the look on his face and I just started giggling. Yeah. And when he saw I was laughing, he started laughing. And so now, Tagliabue was trying to call the meeting to order. Tagliabue or Roselle, I don't even remember, trying to call the meeting to order. And we're both giggling like kids. Well, he went on to be one of my strongest supporters. He supported and encouraged me throughout my career. And from that moment on, at every league meeting, he walked up to me and said, how would you like your coffee? and look, I've been criticized by a number of women for having handled it as I did.
I don't understand that.
Well, I've been told that I should have refused to get him the coffee, I should have dressed him down. Well, my response to that is my mother's. Yeah. To thine own self be true. Yeah. I handled it in a manner I thought would be fun, and it was, and effective, and it was, and silly, and it was, and I handled it in a manner that was good for me.
And it worked. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I understand that a lot of people would not have taken that approach just because that's not who they are. But you can't say you should have done it differently when it worked out exactly the way you wanted it to.
Well, and you just use the key words. That's who you are. Yeah. To thine own self be true. I decided immediately I am going to have some fun with this, and I had fun with it. And this team owner went on to, as I said, he offered me his support and encouragement throughout my career. Although I did remind him on occasion he owed me a tip.
So, Al, because I think there are two Al Davises. And I think there's a whole generation that doesn't know the Al Davis that you knew and the Al Davis that I remember. Like, to me, Al was, just win, baby, sue the league. When he took the trophy after Super Bowl 15 from Roselle when they were in a lawsuit. Like, people talk about how awkward it was when Goodell had to give Mr. Kraft, Robert Kraft, the trophy after Spygate. I'm like, that was nothing compared to the lawsuit that was going on between the Raiders and the NFL at that time.
I'm interrupting for 1 second because until the last breath is in me, when anyone references that lawsuit, I am going to note we were the defendant.
Yes.
Mom, they started it.
Correct.
Now, Al did know how to counterclaim with a vengeance.
Yes, he did.
Anyway,
he absolutely did.
I interrupted you.
So, I think there's two Al Davises that people know, and it depends on how old you are, which is unfortunate because a lot of people that just knew Al through the last years of his life, maybe the last 10 years of owning the Raiders, they'll see him as a cartoon character, someone who was out of touch, someone who just was totally in control and trying to hold on to everything, and they won't see the guy that gave the first African-American head coaching job to Art Shell, that gave the first Hispanic head coaching job to Tom Flores, that made you the first female executive in the NFL. I mean, he was in so many ways a trendsetter before even people thought about doing those kind of things.
I mean, you stated that beautifully. He did those things, Tom Flores, and just chronologically, not in order of importance, Tom, and then me, and then Art. And he did those for the reasons one would hope everybody would hire and the manner in which everyone would hire, which is without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, or any other individuality, which has no bearing whatsoever on whether one can do a job. And to underscore that he did it for the right reasons, I will note that there were times throughout my career when I would say to him, "You don't get enough credit for that." And he'd immediately interrupt me and say, "Hey, I don't want any credit for it."
Yeah.
He didn't want credit. He did it because it was the right thing to do. You are so right when you talk to the generational impressions of Al. And by the way, there will be people who are listening to this who love the Raiders, who hate the Raiders, who admired and respected and loved Al, who couldn't stand Al. But if we're all being intellectually honest, we will note that he did exactly what you described.
Correct.
Before anybody else was even talking about it, or before most people were talking about it, before anyone else in the NFL was doing it.
Yeah.
But as to those last years of life, he knew well before he passed away what his mortality was. And so when people said to me at the time, during that period of time, after that period of time, he was making decisions that weren't in the best long-term interests of the team, I bit my tongue. Because everybody defines long-term differently.
Correct.
When you are facing your own mortality, you will define long-term very, very differently than someone who does not know the end is near. So, did he make decisions at that point in his life that he might not have had he not been facing his own mortality? Of course. And you know what? Shame on anyone who doesn't understand that that's what people often do when they know what's to come.
Yeah, because to me, when I think of those years with Al, there's just one thing that always sticks in my mind. It was the firing of Lane Kiffin, and they had that press conference, and then they had another press conference that announced Tom Cable as the head coach, and for whatever reason his mic was left on, and there was all the stuff they got out. Who was this guy? It was just such in stark contrast to the guy that was so in charge of everything for so long,
And I behaved very, very childishly when it came to the Lane Kiffin press conference. I didn't attend. I was like the kid who chose to stay in her room. I was so angry at him. Not necessarily for his decision as to the coaching change. I had a different view on Lane in some regards than Al did. Al didn't like that Lane pushed back on him in the manner some other coaches would not and did not.
Correct.
So, but I understood his decision to make a change. I did not agree with the manner in which he went about it. I didn't even know we had an overhead projector. But I refused to attend the press conference. And again, childish, probably, but aren't we all childish at times?
I was about to say, none of us are not that at some point.
So I sat in my office and I had two of my colleagues with me, senior people in the organization, and we turned on the internal channel. It was being telecast live, but we had a Raiders channel, and we turned it on. And I noticed that behind Al, as it getting ready to stop, our backdrop on which we had a sponsor wasn't showing. And I said, "Oh my God, they don't even have the backdrop up. We don't even have the sponsor backdrop up. We're not getting anything right." And then one of them said, "Wait a minute, I think that's a screen." I'm like, "What do you mean?" I think that's like a movie screen. And we looked at it and we're like, "It's a movie screen." And then all of a sudden the overhead projector goes on. I didn't even know we had an overhead projector. And I will tell you, very proud to share this, after that press conference, I hid it.
Yeah, the overhead projector was gone.
I hid it. Oh no, it's still there. I was having such a meltdown and such a rant. I wanted to smash it. And I'm at home one night after things settled down a few nights later, and I said to my husband, "I'm going to get that overhead projector, and I'm going to get a hammer or a mallet or an axe, and I'm just going to smash it to pieces." And he says to me, very quiet, very serious voice, "Oh no, that baby's going to Canton."
It might be the
And you know what? Okay. That was the first moment I laughed after the press conference.
Oh my God, that was something. Do you remember who specifically gave you the nickname Princess of Darkness?
I don't know who gave it to me initially because
That's
it was
the greatest
anonymous.
Nickname of all time, by the way.
It is the best
the greatest nickname
ever.
of all time.
It was given anonymously to Mike Silver, who wrote a profile for Sports Illustrated.
Another Cal Bear, by the way.
There you go. Go Bears. So Mike Silver wrote a profile in Sports Illustrated. He was working with Sports Illustrated at the time, of course. And in the profile, he wrote that, and I don't remember whether it was team executives or league office executives or a combination, but he wrote a number of league and team executives referred to me behind my back as the Princess of Darkness. And it was so clearly not meant as a compliment. It was meant as it was an insult.
Yeah.
And it was meant to be a scathing insult. Well, I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
And Raider fans loved it.
It's perfect.
You know, okay, I didn't kind of like it. I loved it.
Yeah.
And Raider fans loved it. And Raider fans embraced it. And I embraced it. And I shall forever appreciate that Mike Silver reported that those anonymous sources called me the Princess of Darkness. So thank you, anonymous sources. By the way, in that article, and kids would call this a humble brag, but really, that's an oxymoron. So
Correct.
let's just go with brag.
Yeah.
He also wrote that they said, also behind my back, that I was a smarter, meaner Al Davis with a law degree.
Yeah.
And the reason I raised that is whenever Al and I were arguing, I would ultimately stand up and say, smarter, meaner, and I would walk out.
See, that's the part of it that is hard, because I've known you in your post-Raider career. You just don't come across as someone who's mean. Like, I get smart and I get aggressive and I get all that, but like, I don't see a mean bone in your body.
Well, I guess it depends on how one, look, I am not mean to other human beings. I'm not mean to animals. I mean, mean means like mean.
Yeah.
But I will stand up for what I believe in, and I will stand up firmly and aggressively and strongly. And I don't know why the word mean was used, but I understand your point.
Yeah.
But I'm not shy to stand up for what I believe in. I will defend others. Maybe tough is a fair word.
I think mean was used to sort of be a little more mean.
Mean.
For lack of a better term.
And I was never a mean girl.
No. But I'm sensing a theme here, though, of you finding a way to turn a negative into a positive, whether it was standing in the corner, or the guy that gave you coffee, or the nickname that was supposed to be bad for you and you wore it as a badge of honor. I feel like that's a really strong personality trait with you.
And maybe also a recognition that none of these problems are anything other than what we can label first world problems.
Yeah.
I mean, look, some people might think I should be outraged that I was asked to get someone a cup of coffee. I'm looking at the fact that here I am, the first woman in a league owners meeting. I'll handle this in a fun way, but look where I am and look what I'm doing.
Other things to be more worked up about.
Right.
So after Al's passing, how soon did you think my time with the Raiders might be passing?
Probably after we made it through that season. When Al passed away, we still had, it was in October, and so we had to make it through the season.
You was the head coach.
Right, and I just sort of put blinders on and focused on, let's just keep going, think about nothing, just get through this season. I also was very involved in, well, let me back up. The NFL requires primary or principal owners of teams to have succession plans in place, to have those succession plans approved by the league. I handled that for Al. I made sure that I kept the league abreast of his succession planning. I got the necessary approvals for his succession planning. Then after he passed away, his then widow, formerly his wife, and son decided they wanted a change in that planning, so I addressed that. In other words, I did everything I had committed to Al that I would do in terms of making sure that the transition was seamless.
Yeah.
That was my, even had I not committed that to him, it was a commitment I made to myself, and I was going to make sure that there was a seamless transition of ownership, and then I needed to decide what I wanted to do. And I was, it took a long time to reach that decision, a very long time. It took me over a year to make that decision. And I was self-aware enough to know that I wouldn't be able to think about what I wanted to do next until I decided whether I wanted to stay or leave. And I said that to my husband. I said, look, I'm not even going to be able to think about what I want to do next until I make this decision. And he understood that. So the morning after I told the team owner that I was going to leave, I woke up and I looked at my husband and said, I'm a blight on humanity. I have nothing to do. And he said, why don't you enjoy having nothing to do for a while? It lasted about a month.
I was about to say, that doesn't seem like you at all. So how quickly did you find the next thing?
It found me.
Like most things do?
It found me. I was contacted by CBS Sports Network and asked if I wanted to join in an on-camera role, and I immediately said no. Nope, nope, nope. I was like Khrushchev in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Remember? Niet, niet, niet. I went full Khrushchev. Niet, niet, niet. By the way, I referenced that on TV recently.
No one knew. Yeah.
And then afterwards, my husband said to me, "You do realize that probably no one knew what you were talking about."
That's on them.
Yeah, Google it.
History's important, kids. Look it up.
Google it, kids.
I always like, things happened before the internet, and you should find out about them.
So and look, I'm sitting here with you on camera, so there will be people who will be dubious about this, but it's the honest to goodness, or as I like to say, stone cold truth. Nothing has ever scared me in my life as much as being on camera. I mean, other than life or death,
Yeah,
obviously.
I get it.
You know, in terms of a career, in terms of profession, if you go back and look through my family's home movies, and yes, kid, Google it, kids. We had movies on film.
Yes.
Google it. I'm not in them because that camera would turn on and I would run and hide. Nothing has ever, scared me as much as being on camera. I mentioned Mean Girls earlier. There was a mean girl thing when I was in school, and let's just leave it at I wasn't the mean girl. I was intimidated by all the, let me state it differently. We all have insecurities.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe not all of us. And if you're listening and you don't have an insecurity,
Good for you.
Good for you, because I don't know anyone who isn't insecure about something.
Correct.
My insecurity has always, going back to the time I was a little girl, and then through the mean girl phase of high school, and again, I wasn't the mean girl, been insecure about my physical appearance. I always understood I wasn't the pretty girl in the room. I was always insecure about my physical appearance, and so I never, ever wanted to be on camera. People who now see me on CBS Sports Network say, "Amy, when we used to cover the Raiders and we would see you on the sideline before the games, you would see our television cameras and you would run so fast the other way, we thought Al was going to sign you to play corner." And so I said no, and I said no repeatedly. And I was talking to a group of friends one evening. We were sitting around a fire pit, relaxing, and I explained the offer that had been made and that I had said no, and I was explaining why I said no. And someone I know said in a very, very quiet voice, "Let it go." And this wasn't one of my closest friends. It was a woman I shall forever thank and appreciate, because as she listened to me talking about my insecurity about being on camera, she said, "Let it go." And those words resonated with me, and I thought, you know what, Aim, you're a grown-up now. You're no longer the girl in junior high or high school or elementary school.
Although we all are at some point, right? I think all of us at our weakest are that person we were at our most vulnerable at all times.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's not just me.
No.
Because, I thought, okay, you've grown up with this insecurity, but she's right, let it go. And so I picked up the phone and I said, I'll do it. And Trey, I was so scared. My first year, I don't know, my first 5 years. And the team at CBS Sports Network and CBS Sports could not have been more understanding and more gracious and more helpful. Bart Scott, with whom I shared a set my first year, held my hand under the table during the breaks when I wasn't talking, and then he'd let my hand go when we were back on camera. He really held my hand, not just figuratively speaking, he actually held my hand. I was so scared before my first show that I said to our producer, "I'm so scared, I think I'm gonna throw up all over myself." And his response was, "We will get so many YouTube views for that." He actually thought it would be a good thing. But you know what? I faced my biggest fear, and I'm glad I did.
So, is there any part of you, and I know we don't do plans, but is there any part of you that has ever entertained the idea of working for another team?
No.
One and done with the Raiders.
Yes. I was a Raider. I was a Raider for almost 30 years. And during my career, I saw colleagues move from team to team. Someone I would know would move from wearing, the red of one team to the green of another, the yellow of one team to the blue of another. And I don't pass judgment on that. And to them, or for them, that was how they chose to handle their careers. I was a Raider. I didn't view that as fungible. I wasn't an NFL executive. I was a Raider executive. And I really didn't view that as fungible. I don't cast judgment on others who move from team to team to team. Coaches obviously have to do that. Many front office executives choose to do it. that wasn't for me. I have had opportunities to go back in, and I've chosen not to.
I believe a wise person once told me, to thine own self be true.
To thine own self be true.
To that, and to having no plans.
Here we go.
Cheers.